Shalom. I'm David Benkoff. I'm the Broadway Maven, and I'm delighted to spend the next hour with you celebrating the life and legacy of Alfred Uhry.
You sound like I'm dead.
No, we're going to celebrate your legacy. Though a playwright whose work has gotten to the heart of the Southern American Jewish experience like few others have done. Driving Miss Daisy, and especially Parade, have affected me deeply as a historian of the American Jewish experience and a Broadway aficionado. Alfred Uhry is an accomplished playwright and screenwriter known for his insightful and poignant works that explore the complexities of Southern Jewish life. Born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1936, Uhry's upbringing in the South significantly influenced his writing. He graduated from Brown University and initially worked as a lyricist and librettist. Uhry's big break came with Driving Miss Daisy, which earned him the Pulitzer Prize for drama in 1988. This play, along with The Last Night of Ballyhoo and Parade, forms what is commonly known as the Atlanta Trilogy. Uhry is the only playwright to have won an Academy Award, a Tony Award, and a Pulitzer Prize, making him a distinguished figure in American theater. His works delve deep into issues of identity, prejudice, and the human condition, leaving a lasting impact on audiences worldwide. Thank you for coming, Mr. Uhry.
Thank you for having me.
I need to ask you about the recent upsurge of anti-Semitism. And I'm wondering, as an expert on a portion of the story of Jew hatred in America, have you been surprised? And do you think your characters would have been surprised?
I'm not surprised. I don't think most Jews would ever be surprised about a rise in anti-Semitism. My mother always said, if you want, we're talking about where to go and travel, and was this a good place for Jews? She said, well, if you want to be where they like Jews, stay home. And no, I'm not surprised.
Okay. So for those who don't know, Driving Miss Daisy is a poignant exploration of the relationship between an elderly Jewish widow, Daisy Werthan, and her African-American chauffeur, Hoke Colburn, set against the backdrop of the American South from the late 1940s to the early 1970s. Through their evolving relationship, the play addresses deep-seated issues of racism, anti-Semitism, and the social changes sweeping America during this period. The play is celebrated for its delicate portrayal of the bond that forms between Daisy and Hoke, as well as its insightful commentary on the prejudices that divide and unite different communities. For me, the hardest part of watching Driving Miss Daisy is when Miss Daisy half invites Hoke to hear Martin Luther King speak at the last minute. For me, it's an agonizing reminder of the persistence of racism even among progressive circles in the American South. And I'm wondering if that was hard to write.
Well, it was the truth. And if you're writing the truth, it's better than making up something.
Right.
It was part of the story that I wanted to tell. So, no, it wasn't hard to write.
Okay. How racist were Southern American Jews in the period in which you trace Miss Daisy's life, and how did that racism express itself?
I think for white Jews to be born in the South in the early 20th century, and even up to when I was born, you can't help but filter in a little bit of what everybody else is doing all around you. We never use the N-word. I never heard that said in my house. That would have been completely. Did we accept black people as our equals? No. Did we love them? Yes. Did we feel close to them? Yes. It was a very mixed up relationship. I was raised by, if you've ever read the works of Carson McCullers or any of those people who write about the South, I was raised with black people sitting in their laps and loving them and hugging them, kissing them, and that doesn't go away. So I love black food. I loved black humor. I loved the black people that I knew, and I was always scared of the ones I didn't know. But that was my life.
Yeah. Okay, coming to writing, tell me about how you came up with the characters' names. Are the Werthans named that because they're worth a lot? And is Hoke Colburn black as coal? Or am I reading way too much into it?
Way too much.
Okay, all right. What about Miss Daisy? Is that how people were called?
My
at the
grandmother
time?
had a friend named Miss Daisy Jacobs.
Oh, okay.
My sister went to camp with somebody from Nashville named May Werthan, and I didn't want to use any Atlanta names, but I wanted to use a name that I knew was Southern and German Jewish,
Okay.
so I picked that one.
Huh?
Hope was somebody who, let me see, I think he worked at the country club. John Wadman's wife, Lila's last name is Colburn. I picked names.
Sure.
All
Totally
the
fair.
names meant something to me.
Okay. Very briefly want to share people The Last Night of Ballyhoo because I think it's terrific. Less people know about it. Sure. I want to talk about The Last Night of Ballyhoo for those of you who don't know that play, which I happen to love. Last Night of Ballyhoo is set in Atlanta in 1939 against the backdrop of the premiere of Gone with the Wind and the looming threat of World War II. The play centers on a Southern Jewish family preparing for Ballyhoo, a social event for the elite Jewish community. The story explores intra-ethnic prejudices between German Jews and Eastern European Jews, highlighting issues of identity, assimilation, and the quest for acceptance in a predominantly Christian society. Through its rich characterizations and historical context, the play offers a compelling look at the complexities of Jewish life in the American South. So I just am going to ask you about the thing that I found most interesting, which is Christmas in the Jewish South. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I grew up with a Christmas tree. I grew up with Easter egg hunts. I grew up never having been to a bar mitzvah. I never went to a Seder. Yeah, one time when I was in high school. Yet I was Jewish. Nobody said we weren't Jewish. We were just very screwed up Jews. I don't think we wanted to be, maybe we wanted to be socially Christian. I don't think any of us ever tried to believe in the holiness of Jesus Christ that I know of. Although there's a history, when you read about the history of German Jews in the 18th century and the 17th century, a lot of German Jews converted like crazy. They wanted, for whatever reason, I wasn't there, but I am descended from those people. And unfortunately, they didn't take their Judaism very seriously. And when I went to Brown can you hear me?
Yeah.
When I
Glass of
went to
water.
Brown from Atlanta, I was 17, and there was some joke going around about a Martian who came to a delicatessen in New York, and somebody said, well, which did you like best, the lox or the bagels? And he said, I don't know which is which. I didn't know which was which either. That's the truth. We were robbed, and that goes a little bit towards the Leo Frank thing, because my grandmother was a social friend of Leo and Lucille Frank's. And when that happened, the next generation, my mother's generation, not necessarily my mother per se, but that generation of people who had me and all my contemporaries walked miles away from really being Jewish if we could. They didn't ever want to say we weren't Jewish, but anything to do with Judaism was scary because they didn't know what was going to happen. The thing that really got them the most, I think, about the Leo Frank case was that Leo Frank was part of the German Jewish community. And they couldn't get over the fact that all these yokels didn't know the difference between Eastern European Jews and Western European Jews. And that's what bugged him the most. I didn't know what it was to be a real Jew. And it was only after I got to Brown, and my best friend was from New York, was from Brooklyn, and I started going to Seder's at his parents' house, and I realized that there was a history of songs that were sung and food that was eaten. And I had nothing. I was confirmed when I was 15, and I had to go to temple every Saturday morning the last year that I was going to be confirmed. And it was as boring as anything. There was no emotion, there was no sentiment. There was just, we do this. And I was robbed. And the thing is, when you're robbed as a child like that, there's not much way to get it back. And my wife, my late wife, was not Jewish, she was Episcopalian. Yet she said, I want to have Seder's. And I said, how are we going to do that? I don't know any Hebrew. She says, well, you know that my cousin Ann is married to so-and-so, and he went to Hebrew. So we started having Seder's, but that was because of her. And she loved holidays. She loved celebrations of any sort. She loved the food that went with it and all the stuff that went with it. And my life was bereft of that. We didn't have that. But everybody in America in the 1940s, when I was a little boy, had Santa Claus and Macy's and Sing Along with Mitch and all that stuff. And and the movies, Bing Crosby. I believed all that stuff. I was a little confused about Jesus, but also, if you remember, the Jews of the movies in that period, although most of the people that made the movies were Jewish, the Jews in the movies were Mama and Papa, and they live in this apartment, and they talk like this and that, and it had nothing to do with my own life. I didn't know anybody like that. And also, the Jewish boys were the ones that carried all the books and wore glasses and were schmucks. And it was very confusing. I didn't know that a lot of those movie stars were Jewish, but I didn't know that. They didn't say they were. And they had names like Kirk Douglas and Susan Hayward and whatever their names were, made up names, but I didn't know they were made up names. I thought they were sort of gods and goddesses that. So my sense of Judaism was confusing. I didn't want to not be Jewish, but I sure would have loved to have been socially Episcopalian. I would have loved it. But then when I grew up and I got to see what all those Southern Episcopalians were, it didn't look so good to me. And I came to New York, and most of the people, and I was trying to be in show business, and eventually was in show business, but they were really juicy looking Jews. I mean, they were funny and sharp, and I wanted to be that. I learned a lot of Yiddish in all these years in show business, but I don't have the background that I would give almost anything to have, and my children don't either.
Thank you. Let's move on to Parade. So Parade is a musical dramatization of the 1913 trial of Jewish factory manager Leo Frank, who was accused and convicted of murdering 13-year-old employee Mary Fagan in Atlanta, Georgia. The case, fraught with anti-Semitic overtones, sparked national outrage and highlighted the deep-seated prejudices within Southern society. The musical delves into themes of justice, bigotry, and the search for truth. Through powerful music and lyrics by Jason Robert Brown, and a compelling narrative, Parade portrays the tragic miscarriage of justice and its profound impact on the individuals involved and the community at large. So I just get nervous saying this, and I was going to show the video of you saying it, because when you came to visit my class, you said something that kind of shocked everybody in the room, which is that you're not 100% sure that Leo Frank didn't do it. You want to talk about that?
It's in the record. Leo Frank, does everybody know about Leo Frank and that he was a superintendent in the pencil factory where the little girl was murdered? He was the last person known to have seen her alive the day that she came to get her pay. So Leo Frank interviewed that Mary Fagan in the morning, and he went home for lunch, and it was Memorial Day in the South, Confederate Memorial Day, so the plant was closed that day. He telephoned to the office, to the janitor later in the afternoon, and he said, "Is everything all right?" And he never did that before. So it made it interesting to me. I believe in all my heart that 99.99.9% of the truth is he didn't do it. But there's that little something. Maybe he looked at her funny. Maybe, I don't know. But it made him more human and to me more vulnerable because he was a very figures kind of a man. Numbers meant a lot to him. Being right meant a lot to him. He had a very, what's the word I want? A very sly sort of sense of humor, very wry, very dry. And he was an alien in Atlanta because he was from New York. And he didn't understand Southern people. He didn't understand that sense of humor and that good old boy stuff. He just didn't get it. And he lived his life. He was making a good living. Also, I don't know if you know that, my mother's Uncle Sig owned the pencil factory. So they were involved. And Lucille Seelig, which is an old Atlanta Jewish name, was there as part of the, it's a very small community, Atlanta German Jews. They came to Atlanta before Atlanta was named Atlanta, which they considered a very important status. I don't know why it made them. And they lived in Atlanta. My grandmother's mother, I think, was brought to Atlanta as an infant, and they took enormous pride in that. And during the Civil War, which was always, we call the war between the states because it was uncivil. So they had to move to Noonan, Georgia, because the schools weren't good enough in Atlanta. So after the war, when the influx of Eastern European Jews started rushing into America, these people sort of took offense at all these people with beards and speaking funny languages and being foreigners. They weren't Southern. It was a class action, and that was part of when I wrote Ballyhoo. It was about class distinction amongst your own kind, and I learned about. I don't know if you know about paper bag business. Matthew does, but you almost got to be black to know that. When black people had parties in the South, if you were darker than a paper bag in certain communities, you couldn't get in. And I learned about the Highland Scots being anti-Lowland Scots and the Black Irish. And there's always, in every community, it's kind of fun to look down on other people. At least it gives you some sort of place in the community. And all that, as I understand it, in Atlanta in 1913, things were pretty even. I mean, as we all know, anybody Jewish knows, there's always rumbling of anti-Semitism, and there always will be, and nothing's going to change that. But it was fairly okay. But then this murder of this 13-year-old child happened, and it was the hottest story you can imagine. I mean, it was unbelievable. This little girl was working for 10 cents a week, and she'd go to school. She was working for Jews, and a Jew from New York was the last person to see her alive, and he looked like an ad for what terrifying Jews look. He was a little skinny, and he had big eyes, big glasses, and tight lips, and he was scary. And all of a sudden, all those Bible-thumping right wing, well, they didn't have a right wing then, but again, the right wing has always existed and always been there, seized on this, and a man named Tom Watson, who's a character in the play, was indeed a real man who was not particularly anti-Semitic, but he saw an opportunity, and he started writing in his newspaper these about salacious Jews with thick lips, licking his lips, and just vulgar things. And there's one editorial he wrote that I even mentioned in Parade called "Jesus Christ Was Not a Jew." So this was all pretty, and there was always anti-Semites that you could call up and bring forth, like Henry Ford was always there when you needed him. And so it became a cause célèbre, and particularly the Bible. I think I don't really understand the Bible thumping stuff. I think most of the Jews killed Christ, which they probably did. I don't know, but they were deeply religious people because they didn't have much in the world, and they had to count on the afterlife, and they had to count on somebody going to save their souls and things like that. So it was easy to bring up villains who killed Jesus Christ, and all you had to do was stick a spade in the ground and stir up a little dirt, and it became a cause célèbre, like now. When the right wing, the words are coded now, but it's the same thing. And it would be nice to think it will go away.
So, similar, as I understand it, to the Jews killed Christ, in the South, the Jews killed Mary Fagan was also a cause célèbre.
Well, Leo Frank killed
Right.
Mary Fagan,
Therefore, right. And by the time of the temple bombing and later, were people still thinking about the Leo Frank case, or was that really, they were?
Yeah, maybe they didn't, your grandparents were still alive. And yeah, people still remembered the Leo Frank case and called it to mind. And yeah, it was, again, anti-Semitism is easy to bring forth, as is any black wouldn't take long. You could go after almost anybody pretty quickly. So this all just flooded the press about Leo Frank, and there was a trial, certainly, and there were all these witnesses of people who explained that Leo Frank, the Jews had done this and this. They were all experts on various fields of belief, and psychiatrists who said things like that. But they were Yankees, and their testimony meant nothing. And the trial was a sham, and he was convicted. But as always in almost every case, there was a bright light. There was the governor of Georgia, Governor Slayton, John Slayton, Jack Slayton, who was an educated man and who, oddly enough, had been the roommate of Hugh Dorsey at Georgia in college. They were friends. But Dorsey saw the light, as did Tom Watson, of jumping track, like I guess J.D. Vance's sort of jumping track one way or another. But it is true that Lucille did get to the governor. I'm not so sure she did it at a dance, but Hal Prince thought of that, so God bless him.
So I want to get back to the dramaturgy of the question I asked you, because it seems to me like you were saying that yourself and Mr. Prince and Mr. Brown might not have found the show as interesting if it was simply, here's an innocent guy, he was lynched, he was convicted.
I think that was just me.
Just you, okay.
They relied on me because, it's interesting to do something like that. Jason did a lot of research. I didn't do any. But Jason did, and he was the authority on everything. And don't forget, Jason was, when we started all this, Jason was 24 years old and younger than my children. So, and I don't think he'd ever been in the South in his life, except he flew over Georgia to go to Miami. And, well, that also is interesting. I digress again.
Please.
When this started, it all started at Hal Prince's office. I had known Hal for a long time. And he said, this was after Ballyhoo had come out, and he said, why was it that the Jews in Atlanta were so terrified of being Jewish? And I said, oh, I think that was a Leo Frank case. And he said, oh yeah, I know about that, but I don't know the particulars anymore. So I told him the particulars. He put his glasses on top of his head. He said, that's abusive. So I called up my mother and I said, Mother, I think I'm going to do a musical with Hal Prince. And she said, oh my God, it's Leo Frank. Now, how she knew that, I don't know. She didn't want me to do it. Yeah. She changed her mind later. So Hal called up his friend Steve Sondheim and said, Steve, do you want to do this? And Steve said, yes, he did. So for about 3 weeks, Steve was going to do it. And then he called me, Steve did it, he said, I've just done this show called Passion. I can't go through this again. So Hal said, oh, that's all right, because Daisy's working with this young man on a show she's directing, and he'll do it. And I thought, yeah, that's great. We get to go from Steve Sondheim to Daisy Prince's friend. Little did I know. So I met Jason, and this tall, gawky, wonderful boy. And he had written this show that was wonderful. What's the name of it? Songs for the New World. Yeah. And it was wonderful. And we started meeting, and I started talking and about the South and what it meant, and everything that I remembered, and about how even now we're flying back to Atlanta to go home and seeing the red clay in the airport to go to maybe sentimental. And so he listened and he listened and he read things and he listened, but he didn't write anything. And so time went by and Jason didn't write anything. And about 6 months went by and Jason called me and said, I think I've got something. So I remember it was snowing and I went to his apartment and he played me the first 2 songs in Parade. He played me The Old Red Hills of Home and he played me the, I want to go to the picture show, he played me the, well, I'm not a crier, and played me the old Red Hills of Home, and I start to cry. And that still gets me. He had read all this stuff about the Red Hills and all that, and he read everything, and he inhaled everything. And I called Hal and I said, "This is it." And I was never disappointed. I think Jason's the best collaborator I ever had. He really listened, and he really got it. And to be a book writer in a musical is kind of a lousy profession, because you give up the best stuff to the lyric writer, and you just do a format. But I like doing the work, particularly for that. So he wrote the score gradually, and we sort of kibithed with each other about things like good collaborators do. And I don't know where he found it in himself to understand, which is so important to me, because we didn't ever really talk about that, I don't think, is that everybody in Parade, except for a couple of lawyers, was a victim. Everybody. Those poor Southern people who didn't have any money were totally victimized, as was Mary Fagan's family, as was the whole Southern community. It was swung by this yellow journalism, and so that believing in the Civil War, believing in hope in something, you hope for something that was eviscerated, you lost what you believed in, you came home, if you came home from the war, you came home disheartened and sometimes without a leg or an arm or messed up in the head, and you had to sell your farm. This had nothing to do with slavery. The slavery thing was another horrible thing, but those people suffered, those white people, and I knew it. And it was very important to me that that be a part of the play. There wasn't just a lot of vicious would-be Nazis running around. It was people who were swayed, and people who can still be swayed into tragedy. And Jason understood it, and Michael Orton, the director of Parade, this time around understood it, because he happens to be Southern, or maybe he just understood it. But it was something that was hard to talk about, because it makes you look like some sort of racist. And that's just was not a part of it, at least for me. And I wanted to get that across. And it was hard the first time to get it across, because in Hal's production, I don't know if any of you even ever saw it, you did. They were running around with torches saying, "Kill the Jews," and that's not what I meant. And the show got, about 15 years later, it got done in London at a little tiny theater called the Donmar, which had about 150 seats, maybe. And it was about a third of the size of this room. And you could stand on the stage and look into every eye. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's an amazing theater. And for some reason, those Brits, I mean, I thought, how are they ever gonna get this? They got it. And it was a really good production. And that happened. And then 15 years more went by, and then this happened. So it happened at a time that anti-Semitism was on the rise. And it happened with a bunch of people who wanted to be in the show. Ben Platt and Michaela Diamond were perfect for the show. That doesn't always happen. That was you know, I believe in the gods of the theater. I believe that they sit up there and they have to screw up a little bit. But they dealt all the cards right for that production, and we'll see what happens. When it was the first production, there was a road company that was good, and so I think they opened it in Atlanta. I know they did because I was there, and of course it was picketed by Klan members. So I wasn't too stunned this time around when we did it. By God, there's the Klan standing there with the stupid signs. Everybody else was like shocked at all. And I was like, yeah, it's gonna happen. So I have now led you far afield.
My next question is about the revival and about Ben Platt and Michaela Diamond. There was a lot of discussion about them, for the first time, those roles being played by Jews in a major production. And no, is that true?
Well, I think in London she was Jewish, but you know,
but not both roles.
No, he certainly wasn't, and no, it was never.
So I've given the topic a lot of thought. I've written about it in my newsletter, and I'm convinced that anyone can play a Jewish character. That encouraging range instead of representation is what's best for both art and for the Jewish community. And I'm wondering how you feel about casting Jews as Leo and Lucille Frank.
If they're good actors, it's great. If they're not, it's terrible. I mean, there's that old thing about you don't have to be a drunk to play a drunk. And in fact, in a play like Ballyhoo, or in most cases in Parade or Miss Daisy, my characters are much more Southern acting than Jewish acting, because that's what they are. However, it doesn't hate. Have a Jew in there. It's very nice. And as long as they can act, as long as they can do it. And to be Southern, it's a little harder sometimes. When we did the play the first time in London, there was a great actress named Wendy Hiller, Dame Wendy Hiller, and she was a wonderful, wonderful actress, but she couldn't say mobile. She said, I'm going to mobile. And she was formidable but lovely. And I said, when we met, I said, what am I supposed to call you? And she said, Dame Sybil Thorndike always preferred Dame Sybil. So I always called her Dame Wendy. And then one day, after we'd worked for a long time, she said, I tell you, Alfred, something. And I said, oh, that's a sign. And now I'm supposed to call her Wendy. But I couldn't stop calling her Dame Wendy. But she couldn't say mobile, and she couldn't say I'm going to go to movie. No, so it was that.
So I have some more questions, but I want to give everybody a chance. Matteo is going to stand up and wave. And if you have surveys, if you have questions, if you want to ask a question, put your name under the question, and I'll call, if you want, and I'll call on you and you can read on it. And if you put your name on the bottom, I'll send you a copy of my newsletter. And I have some more questions, including with Parade, were there historical details that you wanted to include but couldn't?
Oh yeah, there's a lot. Pinkerton's, the detective agency, was invented by somebody that was there, and we couldn't get that in. There was a lot of, I'm trying to remember, there was a wonderful madam named Nina Formby, whose name is mentioned in Parade, who ran a cat house, and swore that Leo Frank came in and visited twice a week, and she was a colorful Atlanta madam, and she'd obviously been paid off by the cops. But there were all these characters that showed up. And this story is really, when I thought about it after a while when we're doing. It's like if you stick your finger in a lake and you make a whirlpool, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and so much was involved in it. They couldn't resist this time, which I guess is hard. You know, they had young Frankie at the end of the show, it being 1917, is now enlisted in the war and going off to fight, and they sing the old Red Hills of Home again, which is fine. But that was circumstantial. It's just saying, I like that Michael put that in there. It only makes, and of course, the fact that we were undergoing all this right-wing stuff at the time that we were doing the show made it very timely. And I think the story probably is always going to be timely. The show was done all over the world, and when it was done in Japan, Jason and I were told, please come and do interviews. Well, Jason had just been in Japan for 3 months doing something else, and he didn't want to go. So I took my daughter, Kate, and we went to Japan, and I did all these interviews, and they didn't know, you know, I thought, how am I going to get to these people? Because they don't know anything about American history, but I thought, they do know something like being occupied. So I talked about, actually it turned out they all wanted to see it because the guy that played Leo Frank was a huge soap opera star. And that's, the Japanese audiences for shows on Broadway that are played are mostly women, and the matinees are huge. Well, so it was touching and wonderful to have that receptive audience love things so much. I loved being there.
So I want to ask you about something that seems like foreshadowing, and I don't know if it is. So there's a joke that Mary Fagan has a last name that sounds like the Dickens character Fagin, who's an anti-Semitic stereotype. Is that a foreshadowing that we're going to have an anti-Semitic story, or just
I love that you see so much into myself.
All right.
Here, a question I got to ask once, don't ask me that again. This was in a synagogue in New York, and some old lady raised her hand, and she says, "Are you circumcised?"
Wow.
And I said, "I don't know what that means." What are you going to say? So don't ask me that.
So you mentioned parade in Japan. You mentioned in England. Has it been in Israel yet?
I think so.
Wonderful.
I'm not sure Miss Daisy's been in Israel a lot.
I saw it in Hebrew a couple months ago. It's quite good.
Good. Did they had a black man?
No, he was dark, but I think he was Sephardic. I think that's how they handled it. So Israel has a different shape for some of its
But he was
productions.
dark.
He was dark. He was clearly different race. Skylar, please stand up if you don't mind, so people can hear you.
I've seen a lot of Miss Daisies. It's a play that I'll go see anytime anybody's doing it. And I loved Dana Ivey. She really is the anchor for me. She said it. But you've seen so many. Have there been any that interpreted it differently? Anybody that it was interesting to you to see, oh, here's a different take?
Dana Ivey is from Atlanta, and Dana Ivey is a few years younger than I am. And after Miss Daisy opened, I had a wonderful agent named Flora Roberts who had been in the theater since, I don't know, the Civil War. She'd been here forever. And she said, when they start doing the show, if you go to one production, you're going to have to go to them all. Don't go. And I never went. And I never saw it when I didn't have anything to do with it. And there was a wonderful, some of you were so young, I'm even scared to say this, there was a great actress who died some years ago. Her name was Julie Harris. Oh, good, Julie did this play with a black actor named Brock Peters, and they toured for a year and a half. And she asked me if I had any clothes or anything belonged to my grandmother. And my sister had somehow saved all of my grandmother's hats. So I gave Julie one of the hats. And she kept the hat in her dressing room. And I don't know what kind of alchemy she did with the hat, but she sounded exactly like my grandmother, was sort of eerie. I just have always been grateful to have so many, Jessica Tandy. I mean, I had, for some reason, a lot of great British actresses. I had Joan Plowright. I think it didn't make much sense, but they were good at it. And
Vanessa Redgrave.
Angela Lansbury.
Hmm?
Angela Lansbury.
Angela, she was at the height of her fame when Miss Daisy started with Murder, She Wrote. And of course, she'd been in the movies forever. And she wanted to do it. And, but it didn't happen for some reason. Then, many years later, it was Vanessa Redgrave did it. There's another British one. And it was going to tour Australia for 4 months. And Vanessa didn't want to go. So Angie went to Australia for 4 months with James Earl Jones. It was unbelievable. She was already 91 and just remarkable. And I remember I went to the opening in Sydney, and a couple of days before that, they had done some run-throughs or some previews, and they were talking about things they could do to maybe spruce up things a little bit. You do this, and I'll do that. And I thought, I don't believe this. I've got two of the greatest actors in the world standing here and playing around with my story. And she was remarkable.
Yeah.
Just remarkable. Really Southern? I don't know. But it's hard. I don't know how many of you were Southern, but it's hard to accurately reproduce a good Southern accent, I think.
How many of you are Southern? Yeah.
How many of you saw Nathan Lane in The Gilded Age?
Oh, no.
What do you think?
It's in his only bad role. He's a great actor, except in that.
It sounds like Savannah, though. It really, my grandmother said "roiled" and "oith" and things like that.
Okay.
So, but it's hard. It's hard to do.
If you think he's good, I will change my
No,
mind.
I think sometimes you can usually tell when they're really Southern, right? Except for somebody like Meryl Streep. I don't know.
So you had great success with the film adaptation of Driving Miss Daisy.
Huge.
Do you think there will ever be a film of Parade? Because I think some of us would like that.
It's been talked about. I still think it would be a good movie. Michael Arden got in touch with me about working with him on doing it, but nothing's ever come of it. It would be a very good movie, and while the time is right, it would be nice to strike.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this revival came out of total left field. I didn't know what's going to happen. So who knows?
Jackie Leibowitz. Jackie, if you don't mind standing up, just for everybody's sake.
If the Sondheim version of Parade would have come to fruition, do you think your book would have differed? And if so, how?
That's a really good question.
I've done a lot of dramaturgy on Parade.
I knew Steve Sondheim for a long time, and from what I know, John Weidman is a dear friend of mine, and what I know about the way that Sondheim worked with his collaborators was he took most of the thinking behind the thing from his collaborators and was genius enough to get into it. So I don't know. The story is the story. I wasn't going to change the story. When we first did it, the one thing I said to Hal, I says, "Are you sure that we want to have the janitor be who he is?" And if you'll recall the book of Parade, we never say who did it, because we don't know. But it seems pretty much that we do know. And Hal said, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. So we did it. And I found ways to never delve into that too much, except I decided personally that the character of Jim Conley's the smartest person in the show, and is a sociopath. And I talked to most of the people that played it when I was around, and we talked about that. That if I said, I don't know about you, but if I'd been a black young man in the South in 1915, I would have probably been a sociopath too. Because if you were black and you were walking down the sidewalk and white people were coming the other way, you had to get off the sidewalk and go stand in the street and let them. I mean, it was unspeakable, even without slavery. So to have a smart man twist like that and pick up on every cue that he can, it seemed for me one way to get around it, because I liked him. And Jason wrote 2 great songs for that character, and there was a wealth of people who could play it, and they always did. To answer your question, I don't think so, but I don't never know.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. The first one is the old adage, write what you know, and you've done that. Do you think you would have enjoyed writing about people more different from yourself as well?
I've tried.
Yeah.
Sometimes different. Well, you gotta write about people that you can really, in your gut, believe one way or another, or get inside of. So, I don't know.
Okay. Finally, how often do you see Broadway shows? And is there something that you've seen that you like that's running now, or?
I'm a Tony voter. I see every one of them. I love still the moment in the dark before it starts. I always believe it's going to be special. Sometimes it is. And sometimes, but what I have learned from going, and this spring was particularly brutal because we were required to go like 3 or 4 times a week because there was so much stuff all at once. And what I really appreciate is how hard everybody works and how much actors put into it and what goes on. And I am one of the very few people who's there in a great seat that didn't pay for it. And it's a special experience for people. And isn't it wonderful that it's having a sort of rejuvenation and people want to go? And, you know, I'm delighted.
I think that's an excellent place for us to start. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for coming. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Marquee is a free weekly Broadway appreciation newsletter with essays, reviews, piano talks, Broadway blasts, quizzes, and more. Sign up for the complimentary or premium edition and learn about all classes and projects at thebroadwaymaven.com. And here's another video I think you'll like.